there's a quote in the film, I think right at the beginning, and I should know it. Generally, the quote is along the lines of, one of the most important things and hopeful things you can do is plant a tree under whose shade you won't sit, because they take so long to grow. And, there's everybody in my team and we get lots of help from tree planters who we hire to help us and other parks folks who come and give us a hand. And it's everybody's favorite day of the year to plant.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Today's episode, funnily enough, kind of a continuation from the last episode, actually. That was not intentional, by the way, but it worked out pretty good. So this episode, we're talking about whitebark pine. The last episode, we talked about white pine, eastern white pine, the history of all that kind of stuff. And this time we're talking about a species at risk that is in Western North America. And we're talking about it in the context of Canadian parks. But the ecology is the same across everywhere. If you're in the United States, the ecology is the same. The relationship is the same. So this is applicable anywhere. But I brought on two people, Brenda Shepherd, who is an ecologist team leader for the monitoring program at Jasper National Parks for Parks Canada, and also Amelie Rivera, and she is a communications officer for Parks Canada, also in Jasper. And I brought them in to talk about this species, whitebark pine. And it's a crazy species. Like, it's a 5-needle pine. It's got all kinds of weird mutualisms and relationships to birds and with grizzly bears and with the snowpack. And it's got these interesting things going on. It's a keystone species, and we're losing it. And I wanted to learn why. Want to learn what's going on with this species and how do we get it back. Just like last episode, we talked a bunch about white pine blister rust, which is obviously a huge problem for this species, just like it is eastern white pine. It's funny, it's kind of timely that this is coming out on this podcast right now, talking about funguses and pathogens and that kind of thing. It's got a bit of I couldn't help but, when I was listening and editing this podcast, I couldn't help but get a little bit of a Last of Us vibe. You know that TV show that's out right now on HBO, The Last of Us? Bit of a spoiler. It's all about fungus zombies. It's not exactly the same, but I just couldn't help but make the connection between a fungus running rampant and murdering an entire species and that show. So, but it was an incredible podcast. I learned so much about this tree and the ecology of it, the history of it, and the efforts that's going in. We're talking about what really set this all off was this video, and I'm going to link this video in the show notes. The video is called Planting the Future, Saving Whitebark and Limber Pine. You can find it in the show notes. It's an incredible video, and it really just inspired me to learn more about this species and what's going on and to try and help tell this story. Basically, there are 7 national mountain parks in Western Canada that have decided to do something about this species that's going to go extinct. And they've teamed up. They've got a monitoring program and a planting program to try and recover this species. The enthusiasm in the video is really what brought me to this story. And yeah, I just loved having this conversation. You're going to learn a bunch. I was really excited. Yeah. Sponsors for this episode. 2 sponsors only for 2023. West Fraser is the number one. Without them, this would not be possible. They allow me to do this the way I want and how I want, and it's just the perfect situation. Thank you, West Fraser. And Greenlink Forestry. Without Greenlink, again, this would not be possible. Been with me since the beginning. Thanks, Greenlink. And yeah, let's do this. Let's talk about another 5-needle pine, talking about birds and talking about pine needles and fungus that are killing things and beautiful mountain, tops with rocks and grizzly bears and everything cool that you want to hear in a cool story about the forest, right? It was awesome. So here we go. Yeah, first of all, thanks to both of you for coming on. this is a conversation that I'm excited to have. I've only recently, like I was mentioning before the recording started here, in the last few years, really only become aware of, in a more real sense, of whitebark pine and limber pine and the existence of this species in Alberta and BC, and kind of the status of as a result of my work as an inventory forester. And so this is when I came across the video, the short 6-minute video, I believe it's called Planting the Future, Saving Whitebark and Limber Pine. That's right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Planting the Future.
Yeah, great video, by the way. I thought it did such a good job of summarizing this. So anybody listening, if you want to know where we're going, that's a good place to start. It's 6 minutes, and it just puts it all together very, very well. I was very impressed. And I just had to reach out because I just want to know more. I want to learn more. It's such a fascinating, both these species are so fascinating. Yeah, just such a cool idea. So, first, I want to start by just getting to know the both of you just a little bit. So, Emily, why don't we start with you? Just tell us, who you are a little bit and how you got into this space. But what I really want to know is why this type of work? Why is this the type of work that you've decided to dedicate your life to? Why is it important to you?
Well, to be honest, the more I learn about whitebark pine, the more I realize how amazing of a tree it is, and I'm starting to see it as the king of trees. It's a pretty impressive tree. What's the most interesting part about my job is the people I work with, because they're so passionate about what they do. So I'm a communications officer, and I work with Brenda's team, and I try my best to describe or to tell a story about what these passionate scientists are doing to try to restore or recover whitebark pine. And they're just a bunch of amazing, passionate people, like I said, and I find that very fulfilling and rewarding to work towards the recovery of a species like this one. And hopefully in the next hour, people are going to get to know it a little bit better and appreciate it like I've learned to, and as Brenda has known for a long, long time now.
Yeah, myself included, actually. I think I'm excited for that as well, to gain a new appreciation for it. I think I just saw it, up until now, as a species at risk. And I was like, yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to dive in.
That's what we're trying to change. We're trying to hopefully get whitebark pine a bit more out of the mountains and into people's head a bit more, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Thank you. And Brenda, so how about you? You've been leading this team, trying to plant the whitebark pine and limber pine and try and restore this species. Tell me a little bit, before we get into all that, how you got into, biology and why have you decided to spend your time on these two species?
Well, I'm an ecologist for Jasper, and I lead a team of field biologists, and we work on ecological monitoring and species at risk recovery. And so that's how actually I got into whitebark pine, for both reasons, because back in 2003, I worked with other Parks Canada biologists across the mountain parks to install long-term monitoring plots. So I've been working with this species for 20 years.
That's awesome.
And so I've seen a lot of changes. And what's really fun for me is that whitebark pine occurs through the mountain parks. And so I work with a great team of people from across the national parks and provincial areas too, because, these are all connected populations. So it really, it takes a community of people, to work on recovery. So that's how I came to whitebark. But my background's actually working on birds, which, there's a strong bird connection, for these species. But, that's how whitebark came into my life.
Right. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. No, that's very, very cool. Yeah. The bird connection is something we'll get into for sure. I'm excited to talk about that one. So I think before we get really into anything, I think someone should put a picture in people's mind's eye of what this species is, where it's found, what it looks like. If someone was to walk past one, what could they experience? Brenda, do you want to take that?
Well, first, for the most part, you would need to be for whitebark pine, you would need to be near tree line. for the most part. There's lots of exceptions, but you need to at least be in the upper subalpine, in the mountains of Western North America. So it's got a fairly wide range, and maybe I'll sort of limit the conversation to Canada, because it does occur in the US. But in Canada, you would need to be, in Waterton to Wilmore, in the east, and way out to the Coast Mountains. And I think as far north, and I might be wrong about this, but around Smithers and Kakwa in the north. So that's where you'd need to be. So you need to be in the mountains. You need to be up at the upper subalpine, and then you will hopefully find yourself in a whitebark pine stand. And there's lots of stands that have trails. Some have roads. And how will you know you're at a whitebark? Though it's called whitebark, the bark is not always white. It can be a little bit silvery. It can be thin. It can be thicker. They're beautiful trees, especially when they're giant. And they have a fabulous canopy they have multiple leaders. So it looks from a distance a little bit like broccoli tops.
That's a good way.
So that's, I guess, a little bit about how you know you're in whitebark. And then, the other reason is the sound, because often you'll hear the beautiful call of the Clark's Nutcracker, which I say kind of, joking because they don't have a beautiful call, but they are very vocal. So it's both the look and the sound. What about you, Amelie?
I think it's kind of beautiful, though. I was like thinking about it. I'm like, I know what you mean because it's kind of high pitched, but I think it's kind of beautiful when you know, especially the relationship between the tree and the bird. And I was thinking about how can I describe whitebark pine? And the first word that came to mind is it's gnarly. It looks gnarly.
Yeah.
It doesn't grow straight. It grows pretty much whatever way. Like, to be honest, like they're kind of like, they're not a straight tree. They can look very different from one tree to another, but I really like Brenda's description, broccoli top. That's pretty much how I would describe it now. And also, because of the term broccoli, it also makes you think that they're green. And when they are very big and they are very green, they're just so beautiful. And another thing that I was going to mention about whitebark pine, and if you are in a whitebark pine stand, another telltale sign is their needles. So whitebark pine and limber pine, they grow in fascicle of 5 needles.
5 needle, right?
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to like lodgepole pine, I think it's 2. Yep. So that's a very, very special trait that limber pine and whitebark pine share.
Yeah.
So that's another way to identify the tree or know that you have a whitebark pine, because sometimes it can be hard to identify.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the first tree that I came across that I thought was a whitebark pine, and I think it's actually in my LinkedIn profile picture. I was like, oh, cool, my first whitebark pine. It was 100% a limber pine. But close enough, right? I was like, I got the 5 fascicle, the 5 needle pine. The one that finally gave it away, I found some cones and I was like, darn it. But I thought it was a whitebark pine for quite some time, and it was hard to differentiate between the two, but also the location should have given it away. It wasn't quite in the subalpine. It was kind of on those, desiccated kind of erosion slopes closer to the valley bottom. So, but yeah, it was very, very, very cool. I remember the first actual whitebark pine stand I came to, you were talking about the multiple leaders, meaning the multiple main stem coming off, growing. Mm-hmm. And, I was walking through a stand and I saw these pine shoots coming at an angle out of the ground, almost like a shrub would or something, right? Like coming probably, I don't know, like a 30-degree angle out of the ground. And I was like, what the hell? I've never seen lodgepole do that. That's so strange. And then I saw it everywhere. And I was like, all of these that I assumed were shrubs were actually pine coming out of the ground, just baby pine. And then I started looking up, and started realizing, oh, this is whitebark pine. This is totally different than all the other pines that I'm used to, which they're, they really just, it's a race for the sun, right? And I'm sure whitebark pine does that too, but just the scrubby, shrubby nature of them, I should say, probably more of as a result of the place that they live, I would assume. But, it really was almost alien to see for the first time for me. And it was super, super cool. And I definitely took an hour off of work and just kind of explored the area. So got paid for that. That was nice. But yeah, it's a fascinating species. And I was so happy to find it in Alberta. And yeah, like I said, that was only a few years ago that I came into that realization. So you're in a whitebark pine forest. It's this, subalpine, rocky kind of area. You got these trees that could be as much as 400 years old or whatever. And I was taken aback on the video where you talked about the symbiotic relationship between the Clark's nutcracker, and this tree. Do you want to explain what's going on there?
Sure. So coevolution is something we see in across the world with species. It's not really common when you have such a strong mutualism, it's called, when one species depends on another for its survival. But whitebark pine has a species that it needs for survival, and that's the Clark's nutcracker, it's corvid, which means that it belongs in the same family as ravens and crows. The whitebark pine needs the Clark's nutcracker. The Clark's nutcracker benefits from the whitebark pine, and certainly it does better when whitebark pine is healthy. But it has other tree species that it also feeds on. But without the Clark's nutcracker, you wouldn't have the whitebark pine, because the cones they're closed. And so, some tree species, the seeds are distributed by the wind, or they open up and drop. But for whitebark pine, the cones need to be opened. And so the Clark's nutcracker does that work for whitebark pine. Often you see them like they're perched right up in the treetop, and they're peeling back the scales on the cones. Okay. And what is like fascinating to me is that the nutcracker has evolved this pouch under its tongue, and it can take the seeds and put the seeds in the pouch under its tongue. And I'm trying to recall, but I think it's around 50 seeds, and roughly that it can fit under its 90? Tongue. Yeah. 50 or so. And it might be more anyway. I don't have the number off is it? Okay. 50 it's to more. 90. Okay. Yeah. 90. Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Thanks.
That's wild.
So it puts them under in this little pouch, and then it flies around, and it does what other corvids do, which is they cache their food for later. So it flies to some other location, often relatively close to the tree, but sometimes further, and it will cache a number of seeds in a little under the ground, under the soil, for later to eat, to come back and eat later. And so they have an incredible memory, because they'll cache all of these seeds in little groupings, often of like roughly 5 species or 5 seeds or so. And then it will remember and fly back and eat them, sometimes months later, and maybe digging under the snow to find their little cache. And to us, it doesn't look like any place you'd ever remember. But the birds remember, but they don't remember where all of them are, or some may die, or for whatever reason, some of them are not eaten, and it's only those seeds that become whitebark pine trees. And so that's why you often see them, like when Amelie was mentioning the gnarly look of the whitebarks, they're growing in little groupings. So you'll often see whitebark pine is usually a multi-stemmed coming out of the ground. And sometimes they even look attached at their bases, because the seeds are all in a little tiny group when they germinate, and then you see the little seedlings. And so often that's a really cool way you can totally picture this bird caching the seeds when you see these seedlings coming out of the ground in little groups of 5. So a bird put those there.
That makes sense. I was wondering, I was like, why is this thing multi-litered? But it's not actually multi-litered. It's just that there's so many seeds close together.
Yeah, well, no, it is multi-litered as well. So it'll be multiple stems coming out of the ground, and then multiple leaders at the top.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, and hence the broccoli shape at the top.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I feel like you can almost see as well where the seeds kind of roll down sometimes, because you have whitebark pine growing out of rocks. It feels like sometimes, like you could stumble upon a whitebark pine that feels like it's growing into rock, and you're like, how can it do that? But it does. It's a very harsh tree. It's a very
Isn't that
tough
incredible?
tree.
Like just having like little bits of knowledge like that about the forest that you're walking through, it just makes the experience so much richer, doesn't it? Like knowing like, okay, why is this like this? Well, it's because of the Clark's nutcracker. Why did it, why is it in this little rock? Oh, because it probably rolled down the hill, or maybe a nutcracker dropped it or whatever. And like, it really enriches the experience and like allows you to fully appreciate it, I think, right? It's incredible.
Oh, you are so right. I totally agree with you. I feel like walking in a forest and knowing these things, it makes your experience so much more rich. I agree.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. So this concept of the nutcracker and you called it mutualism?
Yeah, it's a mutualism. They evolved together.
So it's a symbiotic relationship where they evolve together. And so how common is that in nature? Because I feel like you don't hear about that very often, where it's completely, obviously it sounds like the whitebark pine benefits a little more than the nutcracker does. Like the nutcracker has other options where the whitebark pine maybe not. So I'm curious, like how common is this, and how special is this? Is what I'm trying to get to.
I mean, if you Google it, there's some super interesting mutualisms in nature around the world, and so that's such a fun topic to explore. What's interesting about this mutualism? They're interesting because, as I said, the nutcracker isn't as dependent on the whitebark as the whitebark is on the nutcracker. But what is really cool is that the whitebark pine produces these really high fat seeds. And so the nutcracker definitely prefers the whitebark pine seeds because they're so rich and they're an excellent food source. And so when there's what we call a mast year, when there are a lot of cones produced, because whitebark pine does not produce cones every year, it masts. Right. I'm sure there's other trees that do the same.
Many conifers do, yeah.
Yeah. And so in mast years, what they find is nutcrackers do much better. They have better productivity. They produce more young. They have better survival. So definitely the whitebark pine is a huge benefit to nutcrackers. Also, not only is there this amazing coevolution of two species, but the whitebark pine is also what's called a keystone species, where it has a much bigger effect on the ecosystem than we would think from its abundance.
Right.
And so the whitebark pine is also important for many other species of birds and small mammals, grizzly bears. And black bears will eat them. And so often, when you asked about how do you know you're in a whitebark pine stand, these trees you can often see the claw marks of bears that climb the trees to get the cones. But the bears are also, really sneaky, and they also get cones out of the squirrel middens. The squirrels also feed on the cones, bring the cones back to their middens, and then the grizzly bear comes in and steals the cones from the squirrels.
Of course. Classic grizzly bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating, because I feel like for me, most of my experience with pine trees, right, is jack pine and lodgepole pine, which are fire dependent species, right? So they largely reproduce through the event of fire, spreading the cones, opening the cones, and allowing the seeds to drop to the ground. What is different about whitebark pine? Why is the nutcracker you said it co-evolved, but I'm curious as to, is fire also a way that this species can spread and reproduce, or is it different somehow?
Fire is really interesting.
Okay. Good. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah. So the only way that whitebark pine can reproduce is through the nutcracker. Fire does not, unlike lodgepole pine, it doesn't open up the cones. It would, but fire plays an important role for whitebark pine.
Okay.
And in some areas more than others, but with the long history of fire suppression, and you've probably covered this in previous podcasts, but the long history of fire suppression in Canada means that we have older forests for whitebark pine. Importantly, there aren't open areas, and a lot of whitebark pine stands are now being outcompeted by subalpine fir. So whitebark really it's what we call also a pioneering species, and it will come in and colonize an area after fire, and it can survive where other trees cannot. So fire plays an important role in reducing competition with other species. Fire can also be, it's something we need to be really thoughtful about too, because high intensity fires that we're increasingly seeing more of with climate change, they can also burn whitebark pine. So whitebark pine stands. So overall, there is a huge benefit of fire, for whitebark pine. And, and we have to be thoughtful and think about this for recovery actions, so that we can help keep open habitat where whitebark pine can expand into. And so we use tools like prescribed fire to do that. Gotcha.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it does rely on open spaces. It's like you said, it takes over where things are, the trees have been decimated, and it needs that open sunlight to grow properly. So gotcha. So one more question about fire, and then we'll move on. But, so does fire just, cause, with like, say, lodgepole pine, for example, right? And you know this, but I'll just go through it. They have resinous cones, and the fire heats up the resin enough that the cones open up and the seeds fall out to the ground. And the timing is such that it tends to happen, the seeds fall after the fire has gone through, sort of thing. Why doesn't that happen with whitebark pine? Is it a different type of cone? I'm assuming it's still resinous, but is it like somehow more vulnerable to fire? It burns more easily. It's not as hardy, or what?
The trees have, they don't have any special ability to withstand low intensity fires like a Douglas fir would, for example. Okay. It has thin bark. And the cones don't require fire to open them. And it's a good question. I don't know what would happen in a low intensity fire if cones were still intact. Right. I imagine if they weren't scorched too badly that they would grow, but they don't require fire to open them like a lodgepole pine forest would.
I guess nutcrackers get to it first.
There might not have been as many fires up high as well. They just didn't evolve that way, right?
That was the other thought I had, was that, like in the central mixed wood, you have fires, every 60 to 80 years kind of thing, or like probably more back in the day before we introduced fire suppression, right? Whereas, up in the subalpine, maybe it was only every 300 years. So it just wasn't a force.
Yeah.
Right.
And, I don't know if we have I don't think we've talked about it, but, the nutcracker has like a little bit of a specialized beak, to be able to open these cones that are completely closed, and they're quite hard. I don't know if you've ever touched one or seen one, but they're quite hard. I found them to be like, lodgepole pine, they're kind of like a little bit softer, but the whitebark pine cones are very hard to me anyways. And the Clark's nutcracker has also evolved on top of his specialized pouch under his tongue. It has like a little bit of a curved beak, and it's specialized to open these cones. Like it's the only species I think that has that little kind of a beak to be able to open it. So, and then the shape of the cone is kind of like a little bit of an egg shape. And it has like a little bit of a purple tint to it. And so the Clark's nutcracker has the ability to like I think it goes from the top and finds like a little bit of an opening, and with its beak, it's able to open it. It's pretty impressive.
That's so cool. Yeah. It's a fascinating, mutualistic relationship where it also brings to mind that it seems like a super vulnerable relationship, like a super fragile relationship.
Yes. That's,
right? Like,
I think why it's why it needs a little bit of help.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly, there's been some really interesting research in the States about the relationship with nutcrackers. And one of the key questions was the distance that Clark's nutcrackers travel. So what is their home range size? And that's important when we think about like recovering this species, and when we think about connectivity for whitebark and limber pine, that the nutcracker is really important in helping us understand connectivity. So if they will fly, 12 kilometers, 25 kilometers, we need to think about, well, if we're trying to restore whitebark pine across the range, we need to think about the distances that Clark's nutcrackers connect these dams. So
yes.
In the States, they fitted nutcrackers with little satellite transmitters, and we're really opening up our understanding of how these birds travel and how far they are able to move cones or move the seeds.
And how far is that, roughly?
I'm trying to recall, but I think it's about as much as 28 kilometers is their home range size.
Okay.
But certainly what they find is that trees closer together are more highly related. So nutcrackers will cache often close to the tree where they harvested their seeds.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like if they have 50 or 90 seeds in their little pouch and they're only doing groups of 5, they can probably cover a lot of ground. And if they leave a couple in there, forget about them. Maybe they end up 28 kilometers away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have so many caches. It's very impressive that they can come back and find any. Well, I suppose if they do it by groups of 5, they would have enough that they eventually find some, but it's pretty impressive how they can come back and find these caches.
So I have a question about the nutcracker then, actually. So what is the status of the nutcracker itself? You know what I mean? If the trees require this nutcracker, what is the status of them? Do they have other pressures on them, other, aspects that would make you worry about it? Or is it mainly, if you can take care of the white pine, the nutcracker kind of comes along with it?
Yes. Yeah, that seems to be the understanding. Their vulnerability is completely tied to the health of whitebark and limber pine.
Gotcha.
They don't have other vulnerabilities, say for a lot of other bird species that migrate and have a lot of other threats. They don't have their condition is really tied to the health of the trees.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy. What a crazy relationship. And you, Brenda, I have another question for you regarding you said they're a keystone species. Mm-hmm. So meaning that it's responsible for a lot of what's going on in the rest of the landscape. Can we go into that a little bit more? You mentioned that there's a relationship with bears and with other birds and with squirrels and that kind of thing. Explain, maybe you want to go into what a keystone species means. And I guess a good way I always find, and feel free to do something different if you don't like this example, but a good way I always find is to explain what might happen if the keystone species no longer existed.
That's a good way.
I feel like it's a good way to put it into people's minds, to put the perspective there. So maybe explain what it is, and then you can answer that question if you don't mind.
Yeah. And, truly, what we would expect is with the loss of whitebark pine, that the subalpine ecosystem would be different. It would be quite changed. We think of whitebark and limber pine as communities because so many different species do rely on them. Mm-hmm. So, we would expect a change in the community of species that use the subalpine and tree line areas in the mountains of Western Canada. Like other keystones, you begin to see other more drastic changes in the ecosystem when you lose that species and you lose the community that's tied to it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So it's kind of it's the foundation of that community, and without it, you start. Well, you lose the nutcracker, obviously, and other things. Yeah.
I was trying to find a way to describe what a keystone species is the best way to describe it, and I'm not sure if it's gonna means something to you. But the way I see it, it's like, it's a species that gives back more to the ecosystem than it takes in a way.
I
right?
like that. So, that's good.
Yeah. So the whitebark pine, like, will give back to grizzlies, to so many animals, to the vegetation, to the snow pack, to the water flow, like so many things, but really it just needs like a little piece of rock and a little bit of soil, and it grows, right? Sun, and it's happy. So that's how I kind of try to describe it, because a lot of people ask, what is a keystone species? What does that mean? And I find it hard to really explain what it means. So this is kind of like what I think is the best way. It's like it gives back to the ecosystem more than it takes, more than it needs.
I like that a lot, because I think I found myself being like, what's a keystone species? I'm like, it's a really important species.
Exactly. But why?
Not a very good explanation, right? Yeah. So no, I like that. That makes sense. So it gives back more than it requires. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
that's great.
Something like that.
Good call. Nice. I suppose we should talk about the other big elephant in the room around whitebark pine and why it is endangered and what's going on. Who wants to introduce it?
Well, blister rust is a disease that came in on, I understand, to the port of Vancouver in around 1900.
Oh wow.
And probably on a shipment of logs from Europe.
Actually, I have a side note. Could I intervene for a second?
Yeah,
I just happened to have the last podcast that will be coming out just before this one. We had this conversation. We were talking about eastern white pine and its responsibility for basically building America, essentially, which was an interesting conversation. And we answered this question about where the blister rust came from. What it actually was eastern white pine. Obviously, it had been cut until basically non-existent anymore, right? To the extent that it was in the past. And the foresters here back in the 1900s were like, okay, we need to bring this back. How do we go about doing that? At the time, we didn't have nurseries. So they brought cones back to England, and they had nurseries there. They grew these trees, and there was other 5-needle pines that apparently had the blister rust. And in the nurseries, the seedlings actually picked up the blister rust. They were brought back here as an intention to plant them on the landscape and bring back the eastern white pine. And as a result, white pine blister rust is now rampant in North America. So it came from a place of, man, we screwed up big time. Let's fix this. And then we screwed up big time again with our lack of no understanding of pathology, right? So it's a fascinating, it's a weird, where humans we're kind of doubling down on our faults when we're trying to fix the problem.
It isn't. Anyways, history repeats itself.
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt, Brenda, but I felt I just because I just released that episode, or it's just coming out here in January, I felt the need to fill that in. Anyways, so now continuing.
That's cool.
And so over the last 100 years, it has moved to every part of whitebark pine range. I don't believe that I've been in whitebark pine stands from Waterton to the Wilmore, and I've not been in a stand that doesn't have blister rust. Certainly, the infection rates are much higher closer to the U.S. border, and they decline as you move further north. But there's but there's blister rust everywhere.
Gotcha.
And so, because whitebark pine did not evolve with blister rust, it doesn't have much resistance to the disease. Now in Europe, the stone pines evolved with blister rust, and they're not impacted by rust. They have genetic resistance to blister rust, whereas the trees here do not. And so the blister rust spores enter the needles and then move down into the branches, and then the infection will spread to the main stem. And often what happens is it produces what we call a canker.
Right.
And so that's where you often see them on the branches, the cankers, and there's sort of different characteristics that you look for, but it's thickened bark, it's swollen, it's oozing sap, as the tree tries to fight off the infection. And then what happens is the small mammals come in and they will feed on the sap and often girdle the branch. And often that's what kills the branch first. And then when it moves down into the main stem, same thing happens again. Small mammals come in, they eat around the stem, and that will often be the primary cause, or the ultimate cause of death for the tree. So
interesting. I didn't know
what
that.
happens too is in a really large tree, you'll find over time that it'll die in little patches. It might take decades for a tree to die as you start losing branches. And often when you lose branches, you lose cone production.
Right.
So there's, you're seeing the impact over time, but it may take some time for it to move to the main stem and kill the tree. And so that's really, blister rust is the primary threat to whitebark pine and limber pine. There are other threats to the species too, though.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating problem, the blister rust, because it's such a problem and it's just everywhere. And I know there's been attempts to eradicate it, and in the last, like I said, in the last podcast I had, they talked about the blister rust has a relationship with the ribes species, and that's how it, when it's in between pines, that's where it is. And they've tried to rip out all of the ribes species, so the gooseberries and everything else nearby, in hopes that would help. And it's never, has that been attempted here as well?
No. That work was done quite a number of decades ago, and it was found to not be effective.
Right.
Sometimes people they tried pruning off the infected branches, but what happened was the tree would just be exposed again to spores in the next year, and if it doesn't have the resistance, it would just get reinfected. So again, generally found that that's not worth that effort is not worth it for restoring the tree, and there are other approaches that I'm sure we'll get to that are more effective. So we've learned and we found better ways.
Right. Yeah. So basically, blister rust is here. It's here to stay. How do we deal with that, essentially?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. So in the video, you talked a bit about like ghost forests, and I was interested to hear that, because my understanding was that although blister rust it's everywhere and it does slowly kill the tree, I didn't think it would, murder an entire stand of whitebark, but apparently that's been happening. So my first exposure was the video showing this picture of this ghost forest, so just a bunch of whitebark pine snags. I didn't realize that's how bad it was. That it was like, no, this is a real serious immediate threat. So I think I want to explain a little bit, like how much of a problem this is, and that it's like, how fast does it take out a whole stand? Yeah.
And one of the areas where you see these ghost forests is in the Waterton area. And it's that area is, we often refer to it as the crown of the continent. And it's a larger area that includes Glacier National Park in the US and surrounding areas. And it happens to be, that idea of the crown of the continent, it's a concept that's being used to help with conservation of lots of species across a larger landscape that's really connected. But it's also the area where whitebark and limber pine are the hardest hit in the range. And so in a place like Waterton, you will find areas where the infection rate is so high that it has killed all of the trees in a stand.
Oof.
So there is, and I'm sure we'll build on this, there is some resistance to white pine blister rust, and it's through multiple mechanisms. It's not just like a single gene that makes that whitebark pine will never get blister rust. It's a series of characteristics that tree has that makes it able to withstand blister rust infection. But if infection is really, if the infection level is so high, it can often overcome even those traits that a tree will have. So yes, you'll find in places, especially in the southern part of the range in Canada, where all of the trees in the stand will have died from blister rust.
Wow. So that northern boundary line of kind of where you talked about where not a boundary, I guess I shouldn't say, but where the prevalence of blister rust seems to start to thin out over time as it goes north. Is that just a result of it slowly migrating its way up and hasn't quite made it there? So like it's going to get really bad, or is it a climatic thing that's kind of resisting, pushing some resistance against the blister rust?
That's a great question. And we think that it just hasn't spread there.
Gotcha.
And so that there may be other factors. There may be other factors, like relative humidity. So other climatic factors that make it so that the blister rust doesn't grow as well. So, we're really still exploring some of these factors. But certainly the major trend that we see is a declining infection level as you move north. Okay. But there are areas out in the Coast Mountains and the Chilcotins where infection rates are also low. But what we think is that it's not because these trees as you move further north are more resistant to the rust. That's not what we have found so far. Okay. There may be over time that we start to learn more and more about genetic variation in the tree, but that doesn't seem to be the story.
Okay. So, I think now, so we've got the situation where we have this keystone species that is completely dependent on Clark's nutcracker to reproduce, and as well as a little bit with fire to open up the canopy and allow space for the Clark's nutcracker to place the seeds. And then introduce the blister rust. So you already have this pretty vulnerable tree species, right? And then you introduce this blister rust, which is an outside pathogen, which has started to really place a lot more pressure on this tree. And we can't get rid of it. So the conclusion that you have come to is to start planting, right? Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
Yes. Okay. But wait, there's hope message.
There's hope. Okay.
Yes.
What's the hope? Yeah. Tell me about the hope.
But before we get to hope, maybe we should just talk about a couple more threats.
Oh, sure. I didn't realize I was missing some. Okay, let's talk about more threats. Let's go more doom.
Yeah. Let's go dark before we go light.
Excellent. Perfect.
Put it all out there.
Okay. What else am I missing? I didn't realize.
Oh, you're missing mountain pine beetle.
Oh, right. Of course.
I'm sure a topic you've discussed before, because it's such an important species for forestry in Canada. And so mountain pine beetle also attacks whitebark pine. And in fact, some people have found that they preferentially attack whitebark pine. I don't have the data at my fingertips to go into that. But certainly Jasper is a place where we know mountain pine beetle very well. And so when it came into Jasper around 2015. It marched through low elevation lodgepole pine. We can go, think back to our earlier discussion of fire suppression and how that created great conditions for mountain pine beetle to come in, and then also bring in climate change, warm winters that didn't kill mountain pine beetle, because mountain pine beetle is native to this area, but warm winters are not common. And so we had warm winters, good overwinter survival of mountain pine beetle. It made its way and ate everything in the lower elevations. And over, I'm going to say 4 to 5 years, especially, it also made its way up into higher elevation forests, where the whitebark pine is. Mountain pine beetle had a significant impact on whitebark pine in Jasper, because there's no defense for mountain pine beetle. So lots of large diameter, because mountain pine beetle prefers larger diameter trees, were killed by mountain pine beetle. And so you see, not very different than when you see a tree that has blister rust. A tree with blister rust, you see little bits and pieces of dead in a live tree. But when mountain pine beetle comes in, it's a completely red and dead tree that happens over the course of a year or so. So really, that generally covers the major threats, to whitebark and limber, with the primary one being blister rust. And then secondarily, at least in our region, mountain pine beetle.
Gotcha.
Fire suppression,
climate change,
as we've talked, and climate change.
Yeah. The fire suppression, climate change comes up every episode, right? Like it's the fact that we've, like the pine beetle one is a perfect example, right? Like you said, the pine beetles need large diameter trees in order to survive the winters. And we've provided that through fire suppression. We just got this even age carpet of forests for thousands of kilometers. It's just perfect situation. And it's, but that comes up constantly. So that totally makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Okay. So now that we're thoroughly doomed.
There's hope. Don't give up.
Is there? Yeah, just kidding. But, I think, when I watched this video, when I first found the video, I think I was really happy to see the excitement and enthusiasm, not only from you, Brenda, but from the other folks that were on screen there, and just their enthusiasm. Yeah.
See what
enthusiasm. I mean? Yeah, exactly. It was just exciting. So it was exciting to see what you guys were up to. And so, let's, are you ready to talk about this now? Did I miss any more doom? We're good?
Yes, I'm ready to go to hope and action. Yeah.
Hope and action. Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this planting program, how did this come about? And, let's just get into it. I'll let you take the lead on this one. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to start?
Well, we really owe a huge thanks to a lot of researchers in the U.S. Who really got the ball rolling on the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation includes a lot of folks who really paved the way for restoration for these species across North America. And so, we owe a huge debt of gratitude in Canada to the work that they started. And then, in Canada, the work initially started in Waterton Lakes, which is no big surprise. It's where the problem is the greatest. And so they did a lot of the initial work to help us on a path of recovery. So it really stems from our earlier chat about resistance to blister rust.
Yeah.
So what we find is that there are individual trees that have the traits that make them able to resist infection by blister rust, or resist damage due to infection. And I'm not a geneticist, so I can't go into the detailed genetic background about what, how, and why this happens. But
we'll just say there's some magic genetics that help. Yeah.
But I can talk a lot about how this plays out in the field, because that's what we do. Really, our role in Parks Canada around whitebark and limber is taking recovery action to help these species recover and survive over the coming centuries, really.
Yeah.
And so what we do is an interesting story because it really demands a huge amount of hard work by people. And that means you've got to go into stands of whitebark pine, and you start by doing this thing that we lovingly call the 100-tree survey. And so you visit 100 large diameter trees randomly in a stand, and you assess them for infection due to blister rust. And you're really looking for those traits that I talked about, or the symptoms of blister rust infection. So you really develop a good eye for detecting infection. So you're looking generally for trees that you believe would have been well exposed to blister rust. They have large canopies. They've been around for many years. They would have been infected by blister rust, and yet they have either no infection, no cankers, or they have relatively few compared with the stand.
Sure.
So you might be in such a highly infected place, like Waterton, and find, well, this tree does have some cankers, but it has survived the cankers, and it is relatively much healthier than the other trees in the stand. So these trees are the foundation of recovery. These trees that have some level of resistance. And, the next steps are really about trying to help. We're really accelerating natural selection. So what we're doing is these trees that show some resistance, we collect the seeds from those trees. And it's easier said than done. I mentioned this tree masts, so it doesn't produce cones every year. So really you have to focus on years when there's a mast year where there are a lot of cones to collect. And these trees are tall, so it's not like you can just pick them from the ground. You've got to climb them. And you don't get to climb them just once, you have to climb them twice. And that's because you have to protect them against the nutcracker. So
right. You need the seeds.
Yeah, exactly. So once we find these trees, these important what we think are resistant trees based on their phenology or what they look like. We think they're resistant. We don't know they're resistant, but we think they are. We go in a spring. We know there's a good cone crop. We will climb the tree, first we get some good training so that we can do this safely. We use climbing ropes and harnesses. And we've developed some great systems working with arborists, and we have our own training program that the arborists have developed, and they've trained us to safely climb these trees. We climb them with ropes and harnesses, and we place these cages. That's these fine mesh cages that the nutcrackers can't break into. They can't get their beaks through them. So we go up to the branches up at the top of the tree, and we put the cages over the cones in the spring. And when I say spring, really it's summer, I guess early summer. We're usually in there in June, early July, because if you go too late, the seeds are gone. They've been eaten. So we go in. The cones are not mature. We can't pick them then. We've got to wait. So we put the cages over them, and we protect them while they mature over the summer.
Gotcha.
And, for each tree, we try and cage 30 cones or so at least. And then we walk away, and we come back in September when they're mature. We climb back up. We take off the cage, we pick the cones, put them in our little burlap bag while we're climbing around the top of the tree, descend, and then take these cones back to the office where we dry them out for about a month. And then we open up the cones, extract the seeds, and each cone has like 50 to 80 or so seeds inside a cone. So all of these seeds then get sent for planting. And we work with different private nurseries who have developed some great expertise to successfully grow whitebark pine seedlings. And then we plant those 2-year-old, it takes 2 years, plant those 2-year-old seedlings that we think are resistant back into the park. And it's not just us doing this. Folks are doing it across all the national parks and provincial biologists and the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation of Canada. They're also doing great work. So great work in Alberta and BC within the range to try and work at planting these resistant seedlings.
Yeah. I could tell that you worked for parks for a while because you made sure to point out to OH&S that, like, hey, we're being really safe when we climb the trees. I appreciated that detailed explanation. And I also
funny, sometimes I felt like Tigger up there in the top of the tree as it's swaying in the wind. And you're pretty darn happy you've got that harness and anchor in place.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially the subalpine, right? Where you're not talking about falling flat either. You're gonna, something else. It's funny. Talking about all this safety stuff and then collecting cones. A funny story came to mind. My father's also a retired forester now, and I can't remember why, but he was out with a group of people and they had to collect it would have been jack pine cones, and out of a pine beetle killed stand. For some reason, they needed these cones. I don't remember why. And they're all sitting around. This happened to be around hunting season. And they're like, well, how are we going to get these cones? They're trying to brainstorm this, right? They had ladders and they had pruners and they had everything. And my dad, being the cowboy that he is, goes to the truck and grabs the shotgun. And so this is cowboy action. He's shooting cones off the top of the tree so they fall, and it's the exact opposite of what you're doing.
Yes,
and
yes,
I must say,
indeed.
probably the way you did it is probably the more scientific, more good way to get the cones off without creating shotgun blasts in the trees and openings for blister rust to get in. But anyways, it was some cowboy forestry going on that came to mind when you were talking about that.
I'd like to think that our techniques have evolved, Matt.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely. Okay, so you've done all this incredible work. I'm assuming this takes a long time to do, and this is a program that you're hoping to do in perpetuity. Like, this is not, let's do it a couple times, and you're hoping to continue to do this kind of forever, for the foreseeable future, right? So this is something you're doing every year, is going up and getting these?
Yeah, certainly for decades. There is long-term planning, restoration planning, across the range in Canada, that is happening so that we can plan ahead and think about the decades into the future. Where and how do we take these different actions across the range so that there is enough resistance across the range to support the recovery in the future? So hopefully there is someday in the coming decades when we will have enough seedlings that have resistance out there to support a population that can survive on its own. So that's really the aim, is that we create a self-sustaining population that's able to resist blister rust. One of the really important steps, though, that I talked about was, I said, we think that these trees are resistant.
Right.
And there's a way that we can know. And so that's another little piece of the puzzle that is super fascinating. And that's, that we send for these trees that we believe are resistant. And there's a couple of hundred in Jasper that we believe are resistant. We take the seeds from those trees and we send them to a lab, and we grow them into 2-year-old seedlings. And then they, in the lab or in the greenhouse, they're subjected to blister rust infection. So a nice warm climate is created, and then there's spores that drip onto the little seedlings. So they get a nice dose of blister rust, and then they're outplanted in a randomized block design out in their fields at Kalmalka. And there's other really great testing centers in the US. But we now have one in Canada. They plant the seedlings out after they've been exposed to blister rust out into the fields, and they monitor them over time to see which ones get blister rust and which ones are showing resistance. And so that's when we get the answer back that yes, this one is a winner, or what we call an elite tree. So elite this tree, so that's when we get the confirmation of what we are seeing in the field with resistance gets tested in the lab. And that again, it takes many years, right? You've got 2 years to grow the seedlings, you expose, and then you've got to see how it performs.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it
very,
is.
Very
it
cool.
Is. It's great.
Like
it's great.
I love that. Like that. I honestly, I do feel hope that way, right? Whereas like, I think, if you were just out there planting seedlings and like kind of crossing your fingers, it would have seemed, but like this is awesome. Like I love that. It's a very cool
confirmation
way to do it.
about the work you're doing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention as well that Brenda and her team as well have the ability, and maybe Brenda, you can explain a bit more, to protect these elite rust-resistant trees from mountain pine beetle. And I believe, Brenda, you guys do this almost every year, correct?
We do. And luckily, we also did it during the mountain pine beetle outbreak here. So we apply, have you heard about verbenone?
I haven't, no.
No. So it's been used by forestry to protect trees so that it's this patch of chemical. It comes to you in a little plastic packet. That's whatever, it's probably 5 centimeters by 10 centimeter packet, and you attach it to the stem of a tree, and it sends a chemical message out to mountain pine beetle that says, this tree is already full of mountain pine beetle. Go somewhere else.
Oh, it's like the pheromone or whatever.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
It's a pheromone. And
Gotcha.
there's another one that we use called green leaf volatiles, and it tells the mountain pine beetle chemically, this is a deciduous tree. Go somewhere else. So
Interesting.
we apply these 2 packets every spring. It has to be applied yearly to our really highly valuable trees. And you can understand that, after I described how much effort goes in trying to identify these trees, that it's really worth your while to try and maintain them on the landscape, not only because every year nutcrackers are visiting your highly valuable tree, but then we're going back in and we're collecting the seed from it. So
That's cool.
we were able to save many whitebark pine that would have died. And we actually did a study on the effectiveness of applying these. And what we found was that it saved 60% of the trees that we protected that otherwise would have died. And so we published that in a journal last year so that others could learn from our experience, because it's when something like this happens, when you lose so many trees to mountain pine beetle, it's really helpful to share some stories about what worked.
Totally. Yeah. You got to share that stuff with the community for sure.
And so it can work on single trees only. So we explored the use of them to protect stands, and that doesn't seem, at least from our research, that it's there yet, but we could protect individual trees. And so that's what we're able to do.
Yeah. That's very cool. I love this. I love this type of stuff. It's just fun to see what people can accomplish when they put their minds to something, right?
So a bit more hope here, I thought as well with this. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. Right. I do have, there was one thought that came up that's maybe less hopeful. I just wanted to ask that question. So we're talking about trying to find these trees that are genetically they have the traits to help them survive a blister rust attack. Is there concern about limiting, the genetics too much to make them more vulnerable to something else that's maybe down the line unforeseen? I'm sure this is a conversation you've had. I'm curious about, where that conversation's gone.
Yeah, so from my understanding, there's actually quite a bit of genetic diversity in whitebark pine. And so, concerns about, say, selecting too much that would mean that they would be more susceptible to other diseases. That has not come up to my knowledge.
Okay. No, that makes sense. The only reason that came to mind actually is I recently was talking about the banana. Have you know about the story about the banana?
Yes. Yeah. Fascinating.
Right? And I'll break it down, I guess, quick. I shouldn't mention it if I'm not going to explain it to listeners. But essentially, I guess this is the way I came across it, and I'm sure I'm not telling it 100% true, was when you're at the dentist and you get that banana-flavored fluoride or whatever, right? And you're like, this tastes nothing like a banana. I don't know what the hell these dentists think, but this is not a banana. It turns out that every banana that you buy in the grocery store is genetically identical. They're all the same tree, essentially. They're all basically clones of one another. And that, I don't know how long ago, but whatever, let's say decades ago, there was a different banana species that was actually the common banana that we were all eating, and some kind of pathogen came in and killed them all. And so they had to start from scratch, and now this is the new banana. So what dentists have is actually banana flavored. It's just not the banana you know about, because that banana doesn't exist anymore. But anyways, my point was I wanted to bring up that question of the genetic variability and, having genetic diversity to try and combat some new unforeseen, because, as humans, we seem to accidentally screw things up. And as is evident with the blister rust problem, right? And so I was just curious how much forethought was going into that, and if it was a concern, because obviously there's still lots of natural whitebark pine out there, and there'll be crossbreeding and everything else. So it was just, I'm sure it's probably not an issue based off the sheer number and variety that are out there already, but maybe just a question that came to mind.
Maybe down the road in the future, but I think now they still have a good enough pool of these rust-resistant trees.
Yeah. Whitebark pine are not bananas. Good to know. Awesome. So how many trees, how many seedlings are you able to plant in a year? I'm curious how much. I want to paint a picture of the vastness of this. How much is being planted? What's the mortality like? How many of these trees are surviving on an annual basis? That kind of thing.
Yeah, there are people who work in BC and Alberta and the national parks and other organizations who are out planting seedlings. So the amount that Jasper is doing, well, it's really important for the land base and for the stands that we're responsible for. This work is happening in other areas too. You know what? I'm quite proud to say that we've been really successful with planting.
Nice.
You know, it's taken a lot of hard work.
Planting at the top of a mountain's never easy.
Yeah, exactly. And so first, like I said, before we could start planting the seedlings, we had to identify the trees that we think are resistant. So currently, we have about 140 trees scattered throughout the park in stands that we believe are resistant. We have one tree that appears to, through lab testing, has been confirmed. And so it's just a matter of time. We're just waiting for that testing to happen. So that tree is, for folks who come to Jasper, it's in an area called the Geraldine, there's a hiking trail that goes up Geraldine. So that's the rough area where that tree is located. And there's some beautiful whitebark pine there.
Is there a plaque for that tree? There should be a plaque.
No.
This tree is a super tree.
Yeah, it's fabulous. DBH is, I don't know, probably about 60 centimeters, and I don't know, 20 meters tall. Yeah. Beautiful
nice big tree.
Yeah. We've identified the trees. Now we've also collected a lot of seed. Last year was a mast year. So in our stock, we have over 200,000 seeds.
Nice.
And most of that was from this past summer. We are already growing out seedlings from the seeds we collected this summer. And then in terms of seedlings planted, we're at about just over 20,000 seedlings planted in Jasper. So, you know, it's a small amount when you're thinking about the long term, but it's an important amount. So, you know, every year we are trying to ramp up our planting, and you know, we've planted as much as 8,000 seedlings in a year. And my hope is that we can be planting about 10,000 a year.
That's awesome.
It is. Yeah.
That's very cool though. So you're hoping to plant 10,000 seedlings a year, and you've got 220,000 seeds ready to rock, getting ready to go to the nursery and get started. So I'm curious, what's the atmosphere amongst your team about this program and where it's headed, and what are they thinking? Are they like, oh man, I don't know? Or do you feel like there's enthusiasm and excitement about what's going on?
You know, there's a quote in the film, I think right at the beginning, and I should know it. Generally, the quote is along the lines of, you know, one of the most important things and hopeful things you can do is plant a tree under whose shade you won't sit, because they take so long to grow. And, you know, there's everybody in my team and we get lots of help from tree planters who we hire to help us, and other parks folks who come and give us a hand. And it's everybody's favorite day of the year, to plant. It's hard work. Like tree planters are tough, and, it's physically really demanding, and, they're highly skilled, and they've taught us a lot about how to properly plant a seedling. And whitebark pine are different than planting there's extra care that needs to go in, because these seedlings, because they grow in such harsh environments, what other researchers have found is the seedlings have better survival if you plant them in what's called a microsite. So next to an object like a log or a rock that provides it extra protection from wind and really harsh sun. So, and it tends to do well after fires.
Right.
So we go in after a fire has come through, and especially if there's some great like woody debris. So when you're planting them, you try and identify those microsites. So it's not just a matter of like planting at regular intervals. You're moving around, you're planting in microsites as you travel around, and they can't be bunched too close together. They need room, to grow.
It's not cut block silviculture. This is you're finding the highest likelihood spacing and the highest everything's optimized. For optimized for the survival of the tree, not for the cost effectiveness or whatever else. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So everybody's favorite day is planting day.
Yeah. That's all. I could see that from the video, because it's just everyone seems pumped, right? They're really excited, and there's obviously a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. So Amelie, do you want to tell me about the video and how this came about, and what was the hope for that video going out there?
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about it for sure. So this video came to be as a project between all of the mountain parks. Mm-hmm. We have a little group of communicators, and we share knowledge, we share products, we share messages. Because, we work in the mountain parks, we try to have consistency in the way we talk about things, and we kind of pull our resources together so we're a bit more effective. So this project came to be is talking as to how to best raise awareness on the conservation program, and of course Whitebark Pine as well. But it was a story about the recovery of Whitebark Pine. This is a story of what's being done to recover Whitebark Pine and how we go about it. And as you can tell from the video, and Brenda, it's a very cool story. It's quite interesting to go up in these trees, collect the seeds, have them dry over the course of a number of months, and then send them into nurseries for 2 years. Go back into these areas, plant them again, and all this amazing care that is taking into making sure these little seedlings survive. Yes. And I think, Brenda, you said the aim is 10,000 trees a year, and I'm not sure if that sounds a lot or not. Or to me, it's amazing. It's a great number, and I think from this, Brenda, there's 50-60% survival rate. We hope
roughly, be the planting of microsites certainly helps, and better quality planting over time, as we've learned more from tree planters.
Right.
Yeah. So we just thought, as a group, that the best way to kind of really tell the story is through a video. So we just pulled our resources together to be able to give out a product that is, to me, it turned out to be really great and really tells the story. And it tells the story of, there's a little bit of doom and gloom, like we said at the beginning, but it's a very hopeful story. And the fact that a lot of us won't really be here to see it, but are still so passionate about it because, just planting these trees that have this rust resistance seems to be like the most hopeful thing we can do at this point. Because like you said, blisters rust is here and it's here to stay. And so how can we kind of work around it? And you're right. We do tend to try to fix things that we've broken. And sometimes by trying to fix them, we break them even more. But I think in this case,
gotta try.
Right. And these passionate scientists are really trying to do their due diligence and doing everything possible with the best knowledge they have at the time. And I think that, there's not much, how can I say this? I don't think there's, I think there's way more benefit and hope in planting these trees that are hopefully rust resistant than not doing anything for the recovery of the species. So I think this story is it's a story of hope. It's a story of the future. It's a story of what these scientists are doing behind the scenes that sometimes people don't really know about. And so we've been trying to just highlight this great conservation work and the ways we go about it. And I think it's a very, very cool story. and I'm very happy that, you reached out and got us to talk about it, because I'm very happy to hopefully have other people watch it as well and know more about Whitebark Pine.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that you guys agreed to come on, because it's been an exploratory journey for me too. I learned a lot more today than I knew before this, right? So, but yeah, I think it's a great story. You look at the, good story writing or good, a great movie. This has got all the makes of a great movie, right? It has to go from really, really cool to everything is terrible. There's no way we're possibly getting out of this, to some kind of last minute, wait a second, we can do this. And of course, it's an incredible story. And I think we're just waiting to see how things play out. And it's really, really cool to see the passion, the enthusiasm, the excitement, and the, like the follow through, the fact that this is, like you said, 50%. I know to some people, 50% mortality might sound terrible, right? But we're talking about super harsh environments. We're talking about maybe a month and a half, 2-month growing season, right? Like, I don't know what it is, but like, it's a
pretty
very
short, yeah.
Most of the year, like, at least for sure 8-9 months out of the year, those trees are dormant. And so we're talking about a very small opportunity window for these trees to succeed. And the fact that you're getting 50 to 60% success rate, that they continue to grow and they're not dying over the winter, it's actually incredible. It's very, very good, right?
It's great.
So it's good to have that context as well. And yeah, it's just really, I'm excited about this, and I'm looking forward to following this program and seeing where it goes. And
and I think what's encouraging to me about the film too is that the story that's shared in the film is really being repeated across Alberta and BC. And, a huge shout out to folks who work in both provinces, and they've been doing, while we've planted 10,000, they've planted many more. And so it's the work in BC on provincial land, done by various people and by industry, and consultants who are, working hard, to plant resistant seedlings. So, the story in the film is being carried out by folks with lots of different partners, people working hard, to try and recover the species. So, and each year that I work on it, because I've been doing it for a couple of decades, I see more and more people getting excited about trying to help and do work on this species. So, it's just going to keep growing. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I think what is really cool about this story as well, in the way that it was pictured in the film, is the fact that it's like 7 mountain parks working together for the recovery of this one species, and all these scientists and these people like really, really, really wanting to work. I find that it transpired in the film, and I find that you can feel that from people, and I find that very cool. And this is just, like Brenda said, a small picture of the greater things that are doing for Whitebark Pine. And just to praise Brenda and her colleague and her teams, we got some numbers yesterday on total trees planted in the 7 mountain parks, and I'm very excited to say that so far we've had 97,000 trees planted in the mountain park. So
that's awesome.
That's really very, very work to be proud of.
Oh, absolutely. It's really, really exciting to hear. Yeah, no, the amount of effort and time and people that have gone into this, it's obviously a huge project, and it's obviously taken a long time, and it's so unique. And it's not often you hear these hopeful species at risk stories, right? So often it's just like, this species is in trouble and we don't really know what to do. It's just like, okay. So this is always very hopeful when you see stuff like this. Yeah, it's very cool. No, absolutely. And I see that the video has like 30,000 hits now on YouTube, and it's obviously getting out there, right?
Awesome.
I won't offer that much extra. I wish I had 30,000 listeners, but I don't think I do. But I'll do what I can. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. That's like hopeful thinking, right?
Yeah.
Not so doom and gloom.
For sure. You got to.
If people, stuff like this, I find people often get heartened, right? And they want to contribute. They want to get involved. They want to help in some way or another. Is there some way, what's your recommendation to folks that are listening that want to be a part of the solution?
Well, I have two great ideas.
Okay.
The first is to go out, experience some whitebark and limber, get connected to it. There's great places to visit across all of the mountain national parks and in provincial parks. In Jasper, there's some beautiful whitebark pine on the trails into the Tonquin Valley, and many other great trails. So that's the first thing. Fall in love with these trees. And the second is the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation of Canada. They're a nonprofit. They do work on the ground. They are out there. They are planting. They are supporting recovery. They're very hands-on, small organization that is doing great work.
Is there one in the States as well? I know I have lots of American listeners as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the parent organization is in the U.S. And then there's now a foundation in Canada, which is really great. Lots of amazing people, very passionate and committed to recovery. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Well, thanks to both of you for taking the time to do this. It's such a great story, like I said, and I was more than happy to have you on and to have this conversation and to share the story. And I hope that I hope this conversation gets out to more people and hopefully helps your cause a little bit more. So this was great. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. I learned a bunch. Mutualism is super cool. Who knew? I had no idea this stuff is going on. That's just awesome. Mutualism. Crazy. I'm going to be spending some time Googling cool mutualisms later on, I think. I'm going to have to. So thanks again, Brenda, Amelie. This was awesome. Appreciate all the good work and good luck to you. You're going to crush it out there. I know you will. As well as the rest of the 7 national parks, I guess. I should mention that too. Good luck. Good luck to all of you, and even those in the States and everybody. Fix that Whitebark Pine issue. Let's do it. Thanks a lot for listening. Catch you next time. Take it easy.